Okay, welcome to part two. So we're going to pick up right where we left off and talk about the big picture. So kind of summarizing where we have been with this Shiny application. So we kind of skipped right to the step of making the Shiny app, right? Just to get you used to the code. But really want to, this is going to be the end of the process. So making the application is one of the last steps. So you always want to come up with the story, right? Find that narrative first, do your data exploration, figure out the trends, figure out the patterns, and then put them into the application, not the other way around. And I kind of talked about a flow before. So here is kind of a fully fleshed out strategy that I recommend when you're working through the project. So you're going to start with whatever data set you have and the data cleaning and the organizing. So using those transformations, getting all of the strings nicely formatted, all the column names nice, and then you do your EDA. So you dive into the data, create lots of different plots, lots of different images, try to find lots of different patterns, and you kind of narrow in on a story that you want to tell. And you start with static plots. So starting with those static plots, you can see then if interactivity adds to the story. So see if using Plotly aids and enhances your story, and then think about how you can incorporate user input. So that's when we start thinking about simulating the user and how this is going to actually be implemented in an application. And then we think about the dashboard with the user interface, but we first just sketch it out. So just get a paper version of it. Then we see how we can actually get that developed with code. And then we come back to the server and add in our static or interactive plots that have that user interface incorporated. And then finally comes a presentation. So that's when you communicate. And communication is going to be the most important piece. So communication is super, super important, right? Doing steps 1 through 8 is all great, but it's kind of meaningless if nobody can understand what you did. So you have to be able to communicate both to experts and to kind of non-experts what you did, how you did it, and what this actually means in the context of the story. So big problems require big solutions, and you're going to have to collaborate, right? That's the point of the project, is to work with somebody else to collaborate. And you might be in your career working with somebody outside of your department, so they need to be able to understand what you did as well. So we need to make our solutions understandable and be able to communicate them easily. So that's kind of a big picture where we are at with this Shiny application. So we just went through a bunch of code, right? We had lots of different examples about incorporating and adding elements to our Shiny application, all kind of manually doing this, especially when it comes to the user interface. So when we defined our user interface, we were using fluid page with a bunch of panels, so title panel, sidebar panel, and main panel. What we're going to talk about now is an alternate way of building the user interface. So as data scientists, which is all what we're going to be, is we want to spend our time actually doing good data science. So working with the data, transforming it, creating insightful plots, telling stories, rather than spending hours and hours tweaking the user interface. That's not where we want to spend our value. So the way we're going to do this is with the Shiny UI editor. So I have a video lined up here for you to watch. It should be about 10 minutes long. So go ahead and pause this video and click over to this YouTube video. And you will watch this, and this will introduce the main features of Shiny UI editor. And then we'll come back and recreate our Iris application. All right, so hopefully you have paused the video and watched the Shiny UI. So now we will work through our own example using the Shiny UI editor. So the first thing that we need to do is install the packages necessary. So that's going to be DevTools, which is going to help us install Shiny UI editor. So let's just go ahead and copy and paste these 2 commands into our console. Click enter and run those lines, and that will take you through some prompts. So just click yes on all of those prompts, and that should give you the package Shiny UI editor that we need. So the next thing that we're going to do once those are downloaded and installed is open up a new R script, and we are going to start with the following lines. So to work with the Shiny UI editor, to open it just like they did in the YouTube video, we just need to load the package and then run launch editor. And we're going to give it the location that we haven't actually created yet, Iris Explorer 2. So this is going to be our second rendition of the application. But I have here in notes, right? This is going to be creating a file for us. So we want to make sure that we know where this is being created. So make sure to change your working directory. So I will go ahead and I will save this to my desktop. And then I'll do sessions, set working directory to source file location. And I'll look at the files that I have here in class Shiny. So here is my untitled. So when I run everything here, I should be getting a new Iris Explorer app 2 with eventually an application file in there. So the template that we're going to use is the sidebar plotly. This is going to line up best with what we have done previously. So sidebar plotly, we'll click on that one and click next. And this brings us up to the Shiny UI editor. So what we're going to do now is go back and forth between our code and the Shiny UI editor to create our application, recreate that Iris Explorer app. So if I look at my files now, I have the app.r in my Iris Explorer 2 folder. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. And we see it comes preloaded with a bunch of code. So the advantage of using the UI editor is that it is using the current best practices for creating the user interface. So before we used fluid page, now it's converted to grid page. But the great part is we don't really need to know how this works. We just need to know how to customize it in our UI editor. So we're not going to worry too much about what's going on in here, although there are some familiar elements like select input and plotly output. So we've seen stuff like that before. So we're going to focus our attention is on the server side and also editing the user interface. So what we're trying to do is recreate, to the best of our ability, the application that we ended with, which is going to end up looking like this. So let's kind of start from scratch and see how we can do that. So the first thing that we need to do is work with the sidebar. So we need to get our input controls in there. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the title, and then we can work on those input controls. So this is going to be Shiny Iris Explorer app. And notice as I'm changing that, this is updating in the code right here. So my content for this grid card, again, we don't really need to know what that means, is now Shiny Iris Explorer app. Then there's a few options that I don't need. So we don't have any heading like this, so we can delete that element. Same thing for this interactive plot. We can delete that element and delete the placeholder as well. And then we can, let's just go ahead and get rid of this input control, and we'll start with a fresh one. And we'll delete that description as well. So our select input is going to be our dropdown. So we're going to drag that over. And we see that now I have a select input. And we're going to call this one yvar. So selecting our y variable. So choose y variable. Now we need to do is edit the choices. So there's two ways that I could do this. I could kind of add choices down here and kind of map them up, but I'm going to use the code that I already had previously. So I have this vars vector already set up. So what I can do is just steal that from over there, and I can paste this above the UI. And what we're going to do is change the code now that's been generated for us to what we know it should be. So I want all of my choices to be vars. And I can get rid of that parentheses because it has a parenthesis already for us. And now when I refresh my app, So in order for the changes to show up, I actually need to save my application and then wait for it to update. So now when I refresh my app, so we see now that the ID has updated. So it's just giving us kind of a general preview because it doesn't quite recognize our code, but we know that it is working, even though our preview shows differently. But we know that this shows ID, so it's just giving us the choices there. So we're good with that one. So now we need to do the same thing with our Y variable, sorry, our X variable. So what we can do is drag another select input. And again, we're going to do the same thing. So now I should have over here, once this updates, I have my second select input. So we can click on this to change the settings. So my input ID is going to be xvar now, and our label will be choose X variable. And we're going to do the same thing with the choices. We're going to give it vars, but I want to select the default as vars, the second option, just like we did in our original code when we had selected equals vars in the second object there. So now when I save that, again, it might take a moment to update over here, but that is going to be our two dropdowns. So I can work from editing the UI editor, and the changes eventually reflect out here. I can go in the code, save that, and the changes eventually reflect in the UI editor. So work in both directions. So next up is our checkbox input. So I'll go ahead and drag that over. And this one, we called it species before. And color by species is the label. And the starting value was true. And we shouldn't have to do anything to mess with that. So our checkbox is exactly how we need it. So the next thing that we need to do is set up some tabs. So what I'm going to do is delete the element that we have here, this plot. We can delete both options, and we will input some tab set panels. So I'm going to drag this over, and it says empty tab set, drag elements or tab panel on to add content. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a new tab. And our first tab is going to be ggplot. And this is where we have our static plot output. So I need a plot output right here. We can just go ahead and drag that in there. And then we're going to add a new tab, and we're going to call this plotly. And then we're going to have a render plotly. So we're going to have a plotly plot. Plop that in there. And there we have our two tabs set up. So we now have the basic structure. And we have, as soon as this updates, our plots within the tabs. All of these are inputs already constructed. Our title set up. So we have our user interface exactly how we need it. So notice that we did that in relatively short, in about 5 minutes, compared to writing out all of that code. And we have all of this code automatically generated for us. So now what we can focus on is the server. So notice that there's nothing in here. So this is when you have already simulated the user like we did here, and we can just steal our code directly the way that we wrote it before. So in my server, I can even use the observe event, and I'm just going to copy how we ended our server function with the last demonstration in the part 1 video, and just directly copy and paste that into here. Notice that it's mapping plotly output and my plot output. But what we need to do, this is expecting an output named plot, whereas in my server, I have plot 1 and plot 2. So in our UI, we need to change our output ID to our plot output as plot 1 and change our output ID to plot 2 for the plotly output. And then once I save this and wait for a moment, our application should update. At some point, my input ID for my second select input got mixed up. So I just changed it to xvar again, and we'll change this again to choose x variable. And that should update in the code over here. Perfect. So now when I load the app preview, we have our user interface exactly as we want it, and we also have our plots working as desired. So what we can do now is just focus on the application. So I can stop running the UI editor, and then I can come over here and do run app. So I have all of the code for my application. So run application, and we get our slightly different looking, but nonetheless just as effective plot with our updated dropdowns, our nice variable names in both the x-axis and the dropdowns, and we get our plotly. Again, we still didn't fix the variable names there, but we could do that if we wanted to. And it also works colored by species for both plots. So doing this user interface with the Shiny UI editor is going to be the recommended method. That way you can focus on the data science portion with the server, doing that data transformation, doing the good plot making, and creating good insightful plots for your users to interact with. So jumping back to the slides, a comparison of the two methods. So first one I have up here on the left is going to be the manual way with Fluid Page when we actually typed out all the code ourselves. And then the second one is that automated code with the Shiny UI editor. So notice here that it has a bunch of functions that are new to us, like grid card text, grid page, but nonetheless, we know the general idea of what these are doing, and we can look at our select input statement and our checkbox input. We know how those are working, so we can modify those if we need. And right, that is the main difference, is just the functions that are used to set the structure of the page, but the actual checkbox input, select inputs, the radio buttons, all of those are going to be the same exact code that we would have used if we used those specific widgets. So much easier to do the automated code, and we can still understand what it's doing. Commonalities. So I really just copy and pasted the server from the original version into the automated version. So the servers are the exact same. So that is the advantage. It's really just about that user interface is what the UI editor is kind of making a lot easier for us. And like I said, in the UI, they have the same input controls. They also have the same output. So plot output and plotly output in the main panel or in the tab set panel, tab panel over here as well. So they have the same type of plot outputs functions. Again, it's just the structure that's different. So like I said, we're going to use the Shiny UI editor to do all the heavy lifting for the UI, adding those input controls, specifying where the plot goes, defining the page structure. So we don't have to worry about how that is being made, just focus on doing the good data science in the server function, and then we can easily add that to our application once we simulate being the user. So that is it for this video. So you should know the basics of what you need to know for the project. So you can reach out in the discussion board if you have any questions, and good luck with the project.